There's been a lot happening, hasn't there? There's been a lot going on with the elbows up crowd. There's the tariffs. There's the EU threats. There's a lot of things going on and people being upset with Mark Carney and people thinking he's a fake prime minister and all this. But there's some things that we really need to kind of shift our focus out west yet again. We have the CCP and the tentacles of the CCP that have entrenched itself into Canadian culture and in our province in BC, who are now making active threats to a mayor of Port Coquitlam in BC. Why are they going after this man, Brad West? Why are they going after him? Well, it's because he showed up on a podcast with Sam Cooper talking about the issues that the United Front and these Chinese triad groups, along with the Mexican cartels, they've been inflicting on British Columbians and Canadians for far too long. And he calls it out. And so this podcast aired early February, and we're going to kind of show a couple quick clips of what has been happening, what he brought to the surface, one of which being his relationship and conversation of Joe Biden's Secretary of State, saying they are no longer have any trust for Canada.
Scale. So think about everything that's required as a foundation to facilitate that. The banking system, business fronts, properties, all the different touch points, and the fact that has been successfully achieved by these organizations in Canada. He, of course, shared that President Biden had tasked him with building a global coalition and a response to all of this. And he shared that it was the assessment of the U.S. government that Canada was a very concerning weak link and had become an increasingly attractive place to operate out of for transnational criminal organizations because our laws are deficient, investigations are hamstrung, convictions are rare.
That's just kind of a quick reminder of how he called out what the Biden Secretary of State said to him about why they are starting to lack trust in Canada. Or a second point of this podcast where he calls out the corruption that is so prevalent in our political class here in this country. And he calls that out too at his second point in this podcast.
Apparatus that surrounds our elected officials. And you would hope that there would be a real strong line between our political leadership and those individuals who are engaged in that level of criminality. But that line seems to be very blurred. And I think it is, in some measure, a result of a misguided view by some elected officials that in order to win the votes of certain communities in this country, that they have to that they engage with these individuals who present themselves as community leaders or the such, but who are in fact, incredibly bad actors. And then this gets to the overlapping role specifically of the Chinese Communist Party and the United Front. So there is a lot there. But the fact that our American partners are sharing their very serious concerns and that it's at a level to the point where they no longer feel that they can provide evidence because they don't trust and don't have confidence in our ability to act on that evidence is, as I said, stunning to me. And this is something that I have carried with me since that meeting. And you look at some of the botched investigations or the fact that some of these people who are high level people and everyone knows what they're up to. Everyone knows, but they seem untouchable. And I find myself asking the question why a lot these days, Sam.
I find myself asking the question why a lot these days, Sam. And again, this was Mayor Brad West of Port Coquitlam shining a light on these issues. And he's been a huge voice trying to highlight these problems for a long, long time. To start this show, he openly said, before the fentanyl czar was named by Trudeau at the time, he said, I would happily leave my post as Mayor of Port Coquitlam to be Canada's fentanyl czar and crack down on these issues. And just hearing the passion he speaks about in this podcast, in this interview, I can say he's the one I would want on that as well. Because again, haven't heard a lot from Kevin Brazeau. He's shown up at a couple press conferences, but hasn't said anything. He's just been there. This man shows he wants to take action. This man calls out the political corruption. This man looks like he wants to get into it. And you can hear the passion in his voice and how this ticks him off and how it's ravaging his community out in BC. And he wants to do something about it. He wants to see something done about it. And even just saying why a lot. Why is this happening? But since this interview, he's received a higher level of threats. Surprise, surprise. Brad West posted this just less on Sunday. He says, my interview with Sam Cooper obviously hit a nerve with the Chinese Communist Party officials and their proxies in BC. A noticeable uptick in threats since then. Yep, have reported it. But nothing beats sunlight for these cowards who operate in the shadows. They're so desperate to preserve their grip, they'll reference family to scare you off. The lowest of the low. Guess they don't realize it's because of my family. I'll keep fighting for Canada that puts our citizens and interests first. Man, hoorah. Got me going reading that. That is a man who's full of passion. That is a man who legitimately actually cares for the country, not using it as a stamp to put on a poster or words to put on a tweet to show that he's Canadian. This is a man who legitimately cares for his community and legitimately cares for Canadians and wants to see this stuff ravaged out of our society. And I have so much respect for him. And I wish him protection. I wish the higher up political class in BC and in our country here in Canada will take this seriously so Brad West doesn't actually face any harm for wanting to call this out. And it just bums me out that a foreign country can have this much impact in our country, in our land here in Canada, and our politicians do jack about it. It's been a problem for a long, long, long time. Mark Cohodes retweeted a retweet of Mayor Brad West's post there. And he said this about Brad West. He says, he's one of the very few left now with David Eby in the bag and drinking corruption Kool-Aid. And Mark Cohodes went off on one last week, going hard and fast at David Eby. He said this last week. He says, make no mistake, Dave Eby is the smartest man in the room as it relates to Arctic Mexico. The problem, Dave, is that Sam Cooper and I know who you are and are 5 steps ahead of you. Your move to do the right thing, rather the path you are taking. You made a mistake selling out to the CCP, and let's leave it at that. Publicly saying David Eby sold out to the Communist Party of China. Those are some big statements. I reposted that post and was like, holy jumping. I can't believe what I just read. And Mark Cohodes is not just some schlub who's mad at politicians on the internet. No. Let's keep in mind of who Mark Cohodes is. He's a high-profile short seller and fraud hunter who earned his reputation finding hidden problems and inflated profits on Wall Street. And he references an article, Global News, interviewed him back in 2018 about this issue. An ex-Wall Street short seller's drastic advice for saving Vancouver's economy and itself. He says, seize assets, prosecute, pay whistleblowers. Those are just a few of the recommendations Mark Cohodes has to save Vancouver's economy. And as we read earlier, Cohodes is a high-profile short seller and fraud hunter who earned his reputation finding hidden problems and inflated profits on Wall Street, and lately he's turned his attention to BC. Cohodes admits he's friends with BC Attorney General David Eby, who last September hired former Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP Peter Gurman to conduct an investigation into the province's money laundering problem. Reports of criminal activity started surfacing a decade ago, while this week's report by the BC government, bluntly titled Dirty Money, links money laundering to BC's opioid overdose and real estate crisis. It doesn't explain why the previous government under BC leader Christy Clark wasn't able to stop it. David Eby, that's a name you recognize here, right? Keep in mind when this article was 2018. John Horgan was the premier at the time. David Eby was attorney general at this time. He wasn't in power. He knew full well what was happening in this province, what was going on, what was leading to the inflation of real estate prices in the city, how crooked and corrupt practices were hurting the province and its cities. He knew this has been going on a long time, and Mark made sure to very well link this article and remind David Eby how long he has known about this for and what's been for a long time. And just a reminder to all our listeners of who Mark Cohodes is, he hopped on with Sam Cooper in this interview back in early February, calling out this very issue, calling out David Eby by name, saying, hey, why doesn't he come on the podcast with us? And let's have a conversation because he knows us very well.
If there is the will to do it. I mean, I'm horribly disappointed in my pal David Eby. Let's get Eby on here with Sam and I. We all know each other. I was there for his inauguration. I mean, wouldn't you say, Sam? I mean, we all know each other.
We know each other, and David Eby knows the problems very well. He has to say a certain line like Mr. Harper does, like Mr. Trudeau does, but I know that Mark and I know that David Eby knows the vulnerability of British Columbia, and people can go to Maclean's. He says that Trump is right. We have deep problems with Mexican cartels, Chinese transnational crime, and fentanyl. Yes. But he says he was surprised with the way Trump came out and threatened them. And David Eby said, we were working with the American officials. The problem is nothing was changing.
There you have Mark on the right and there's Sam on the left. And Mark called it out. He was like, we know David Eby very well. You saw in that 2018 article that they've worked together in the past. They've had conversations. They've been one-on-one talking about these very issues. They know each other well. And for Mark Cohodes to straight up say that you sold out the CCP is a huge statement. It's not just some schlub on the internet who's upset at a political official. No, he knows Eby well. He has a strong background with him, has known him as early as 2018, likely earlier. These people go back 10 years minimum. As I said, he's not just some random jabroni on the internet. He knows David Eby. He knows that David knows about these issues. And yet, we're going to keep having the CCP and its tentacles in our country threaten our mayors on Canadian soil. And the Premier will do nothing. Our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, will do nothing. The Liberals, in bed with these people, will do nothing. The only people who are willing to do something is people in the municipal politics like Brad West, willing to fight for his family, for his city, and for his dang country. Because all you're going to get from BC Premier right now is Article 7, Bill 7, trying to make sure things don't actually go through legislature so he can just sign bills into law. That's what he wants to do. That's the power he's looking for to address the Trump tariff issue. Not even to address the fentanyl issue. I still have an issue with him trying to install draconian laws that give him singular, overwhelming power. But if at least it was like for something like trying to address a fentanyl crisis, I'd be like, okay, we shouldn't do that, but I appreciate the hustle. I can appreciate the game. No, he wants to address the tariff issue. No other premier in this country is putting that forward but him. Looks like he's gotten real close to CCP, hasn't it? Very, very close. If you live in BC, you cannot trust this man, yet you voted him in anyways. People in BC either aren't doing their research, or they're so wrapped up in virtue signaling and identity politics that they'll vote for their own demise and destruction of their communities and corruption of their officials for the sake of looking good on paper. It's a wild time. We're going to be keeping a close eye on all of it. But have yourselves a good one. I'm out.